Mali. Chad suffers from the double jeopardy of terrorist attacks in the north, from the front for change and comfort in China first. And that one of those attacks went through the life of Idris Deby, the former president. And in the south, it suffers attacks from Boko Haram. Cameroon is contending with Boko Haram in its northwest region, while Nigeria's northeast has been the theater of war with the same group for as long as anyone can remember. Ivory Coast, Benin Republic, and Ivory Coast and Benin Republic, in their latter front phases, are beginning to witness a flow of terrorism, with terrorists using them as sanctuaries. So, West Africa has gradually been encircled and suffocated by extremism and terrorism. Your predecessor, General Buhari, famously told us that if we don't kill corruption, corruption will kill us. This is not true of terrorism. If it is not confronted with a coherent, determined, and restless and relentless strategy, extremism will overrun the region. From the results so far, the counter-insurgency strategies of the countries in the region seem to be ineffective or inappropriate. After initial individual national efforts to fight terrorism, these countries have now adopted a multilateral approach. Nigeria, Chad, Cameroon, Benin, and Niger opted for this approach when they rejuvenated the multinational joint task force, which was established as far back as 1995 by General Sani Abacha. They rejuvenated it in 2015 and located its command headquarters in N'Djamena, Chad, after the debacle of 2015, when its initial headquarters in Bada, Nigeria, was overrun by Boko Haram terrorists. It will appear that the force is now helping to stabilize the security of member states. The core Sahel states of Burkina Faso, Chad, Mali, Mauritania, and Niger, which call themselves the Sahel G5, initially put their faith in France and other Western powers to halt the advance of terrorism on their territories. While these external interventions were helpful in stabilizing security, particularly in saving the capital of Mali, Bamako, from being overrun by jihadists in 2013, the tide of terrorist activities have not abated. It has not abated. Hence, the country decided to set up a joint counter-insurgency force, what they call the Sahel G5 Joint Force in 2017. It is not known yet whether that force has made any significant contribution to the war against terrorism. Indeed, because security forces in the G5 countries are poorly equipped and lack the operational capacity to effectively confront terrorists, the joint force depends for logistic support from France and other EU countries. Sir, you will need to avail yourself of the purpose of the deployment, purpose, and operations of the various Western military missions in the Sahel. Almost every Western power is there. France has Operation Bakale and more recently Operation Sabre. The EU countries operate with Operation Takuba. The US has a sizable base in Niger with drones armed with air-fire missiles. It will be able to know whether their interest in the region is counter-terrorism or they are merely on guard duty to protect precious mineral deposits. And talking of guard duty, you may wish to keep an eye on the new entrant into the neo-colonial game, Russia, with our partner group. Given the record of mineral grab by this group in Syria, Central African Republic, Libya, and Western Mali, and the recent attempt to march on Moscow, allowing it to spread the state taboos in the Sahel, will be like hiring hyenas to guide over chickens, or worse, like riding on the back of a tiger. It might interest you to know, sir, that ECOWAS has been a powerless spectator in the unending drama of instability and terrorism in the region. Apart from the small, but of course nonetheless, notable achievement of bullying Gambia to respect the result of the presidential election in the Gambia, it has not been able to exert any influence or impose any effective sanctions on the military regimes in Burkina Faso, Guinea, and Mali. It is of course well known that it has no active presence in the war against terrorism in the South. With you as president, sir, of the organization for which I ask you to accept my congratulations, and your powerful and insightful acceptance speech, there's hope that ECOWAS will have a more vigorous presence in the politics and security management in the region. Your Excellency, I know that you are very aware of the security challenges in Sahel and indeed the whole of Africa, West Africa. This was evident in your acceptance speech as President of ECOWAS at the recent summit in Guinea-Bissau. You conveyed a determination to confront these challenges. Whatever I may say, therefore, in terms of suggestions, you only need to add or reinforce measures that you may already be contemplating. There is a need to understand the underlying factors of instability and insecurity in the region. They include geopoliticism, international jihadism, mineral resources scramble, debt and dependence, desertification, migration, and weaknesses of national and regional response capacities. You might want to expand and enhance cooperation with all Sahel states in order to
the research fellow at the NIA to speak on Nigeria's Afrocentric foreign policy and its relevance in a dynamic international system.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I quote, "The centerpiece of any country's foreign policy ought to be that country itself, if it seriously considers itself a rational actor on the world stage. Every single action should be adjudged by how much it advances our national power and influence, and how much it advances our interests, objectives, and purpose." That's according to Dr. Obadiah Maliafia, who is an economic and policy analyst. There was a picture I would have loved to show, but unfortunately my slides are not available. So by way of introduction, Nigeria's foreign policy over the years has been characterized by both continuity and change. Okay, thank you. The fundamental objectives of Nigerian foreign policy as codified. The perspective at independence was to ensure, or for the policy was to ensure the eradication of colonialism, apartheid, and racial discrimination. And this has been significantly achieved with the independence of African states, but of course, except for Western Sahara that still have some issues, and then the eradication of apartheid in Africa. However, despite this eradication, successive Nigerian leaders have still adopted Africa as the centerpiece of Nigeria's foreign policies. And in implementing this policy thrust, leaders have expended huge amounts of human and material resources to drive this policy in Africa without any corresponding outcome. And so there's a whole lot of debates in the literature. Scholars and students of international relations and Nigeria's foreign policy, they have begun to argue, that Nigeria's Afrocentric policy lacks relevance and utility value, particularly at Africa Union and other platforms, and that Nigeria will provide the leadership in achieving economic prosperity for Africa through a proactive, in Africa and in fact in the world, this paper seeks to enter. And so this study contributes to these debates. There's a raging debate in the literature. And so this paper, my paper contributes to that on the relevance and the benefits of Nigeria African-centered foreign policy. I provide some conceptual and theoretical perspectives. Most speakers have already provided definitions of foreign policy, but I'll just say that foreign policy essentially is a guide for nations. It also provides a conceptual understanding for Afrocentrism as a concept, and it refers to a political construct it's Nigeria over the years has adopted as a core aspect of its foreign policy. For this study, I adopt the constructive and beneficial concentrism model by Oluwadeniji. This theory is actually an improvement on the concentric circle theory by Ibrahim Gambari, and essentially it focuses on the centrality of Nigeria's interests and Nigerian citizens, the interests of Nigerian citizens. It builds on the four concentric circle theory of Ibrahim Gambari to say that there's a need for Nigeria to accrue some benefits from Nigeria's engagements in the world. And the Nigerian citizens should also be at the core of the benefits of Nigeria's external engagements. And so the focus of this theory is the Nigerian people and the Nigerian state. So I provide an overview of Nigeria's Afrocentric foreign policy. The policy prioritizes the interests and the solidarity of Africa and the people of Africa. And it was declared, it was declared by former Prime Minister, Nigeria's Prime Minister, Tafawa Balewa, when Nigeria was admitted as the 99th member to the UN in October 1960, where in his speech he had said and declared that Africa, categorically clear, that Africa is the centerpiece of Nigeria's foreign policy. And over the years since independence, successive administrations have demonstrated or implemented this foreign policy thrust through aggressive campaigns against colonialism, racial discrimination, apartheid, conflict resolution in Africa, the interests of Africa and African citizens. And so Nigeria's, like the DG was saying, Nigerian leaders at independence perceived of Nigeria as having natural leadership roles. Of course, based on the fact that Nigeria is the most populous black nation, we have a huge population as well as human and mineral resources. And so Nigerian leaders came up with different metaphors to regard this. So we talked about historic mission, Nigeria's manifest destiny. Bolaji Akinyemi talks about the mega syndrome, and Nigeria is naturally inclined to lead Africa. Another factor that led to the adoption of this policy at independence is the fact that Nigerian leaders at that time had thought that the policy would enhance Nigeria's hegemonic aspirations and role in Africa. And so they felt that would be a platform through which Nigeria can achieve her hegemonic aspirations and ambitions in Africa. Also, at that time, the global and regional context of the late 20th century, of the 1960s, 1970s, where you had colonialism, countries were coming out of, were fighting colonialism and getting independence. There was racial discrimination, issues of Pan-Africanism that led to the civil rights movements, and apartheid were some of the issues that encouraged Nigerian leaders at that time to begin to fight and take up the cause of Africa, as in their foreign policy. Also, the naivety of the leaders at that time is also another factor that has been raised by scholars, because Nigeria at that time was a country, a newly independent country, just with getting independence, and so our leaders at that time were a bit unskilled in foreign policy articulation, and they also had this idealism in their minds that Nigeria was to be at the forefront and be the voice for Africa. And so these are some of the factors that led to Nigeria adopting an African-centered foreign policy. However, like I said, there's a raging debate in the literature by scholars and students of international relations and Nigerian foreign policy that have argued against that time and now differs of Nigeria's Afrocentric foreign policy is the fact that scholars have argued that in spite of the massive investments that Nigeria puts in material and human resources to fight against colonialism on the continent, no economic benefits actually accrue to Nigeria. I'm sure we all know what Nigeria did with ECOMOG in Southern Africa, with the eradication of colonialism and even apartheid. in terms of human and material resources, Nigerians lost their lives, in fighting in Sierra Leone and Liberia. And these scholars have argued that there has not been any economic benefit to the country. So why do we pursue the interest of Africa? Why and leave Nigeria's interests instead of African interests? Another point is the fact that even for the Nigerian citizens, there has been no benefit. On the other hand, Nigerians have been killed, they have been attacked and killed across Africa. The DG had talked about xenophobia. Nigerians, they face hostility on Africa. You would have expected that with so many things that Nigeria did, but Nigerian citizens, wherever they may be, will have friendly relations, they'll be whatever African country they are in. But most times, there's a lot of hostility against Nigerians. They are attacked and killed. Even in Ghana, there were Nigerian traders in Ghana recently had taxes imposed on them, inappropriate taxes. Nigerians have been killed in Burkina Faso and in Guinea and several parts of Africa. And so scholars have argued that why would Nigeria hold on to this African Afrocentrism foreign policy when even your people are being attacked in other parts of Africa? And so it should be discarded. They argue that the foreign policy thrust should be discarded. In the same vein, scholars have also said that in spite of the huge investments in financial aid and assistance to African countries have not reciprocated. And instead of supporting Nigeria in multilateral fora for positions, they have been hostile and opposed to Nigeria in lobbying for some positions. At the same time, prevailing economic and socioeconomic domestic contexts, like with the weak economy, insecurity, declining revenue for Nigerians, multidimensional poverty, there's a lot of hardship. And in addition to that is the issues of terrorism, insecurity. There's a whole lot of issues. There's a plethora of challenges that is confronting Nigeria. So why would we leave all that and now decide that we'll take Africa's interests as our own interests? And these domestic challenges have actually limited Nigeria's capacity to fulfill its leadership and development aspirations. And according to a hostile guy, he called it a crippled giant. So Nigeria is referred to, is a giant but it's crippled. But I go ahead to say that Nigeria is not just a crippled giant at this time. Nigeria is a bedridden giant. A crippled giant can still try. But Nigeria has become bedridden. And so there's a need to get Nigeria back on its feet. Of course, Adekeye Adebajo calls Nigeria the Gulliver, African's Gulliver, who the Lilliputans have tied him down. And so there's a need to focus on domestic challenges before Nigeria begins to say that, oh, we are adopting an Afrocentric foreign policy, meanwhile your own domestic challenges are overwhelming. And I conclude by saying that the policy has not effectively benefited Nigeria and its citizens over the years. And so there's a need to review these policies, to adapt the dynamic international system. Nigeria has a battered economy, and this limits our potential to engage externally. So there's a contemporary, regional, and global realities, therefore demand a Nigerian-focused, Nigerian-centered philosophy, Nigerian-centered African foreign policy, I beg your pardon. I recommend, my thesis in this paper is that Nigeria should have a Nigeria-centric foreign policy, one that is inward-looking, and that has Nigeria as the foreign policy thrust. A domestic-first bias. The bias should be domestic first before, external. And then these domestic challenges should be effectively addressed. Knowing fully well that foreign policy is fertilized by the domestic environment. And so if your domestic environment is in shambles, what do you have to give? You can't give what you don't have. So Nigerian foreign policy in this new dispensation of the new president should be premised on transforming Nigeria into an economic and industrial hub in Africa, in addition to the protection of Nigeria's vital national interests and the citizens' well-being, both in Nigeria and abroad, is very crucial. And so while we encourage Nigeria's engagement in Africa in order to develop the region, I argue that Nigeria should seek first is economic development, after which every other thing shall be added onto her. Thank you.
Nigerian. Yes, I am a Nigerian, and very much in the heart of Nigeria from Plateau State. And